Hi, I'm Caitlin from Stitched Up, and today we're going to do a scrunchie tutorial out of scrap fabric. We're going to do a standard version first, and then we're going to add a big bow. So for this tutorial, all you need is some elastic. I've got a 0.7 millimeter width here, some scrap fabric, some scissors, some pins, and then a knitting needle and a safety pin will also be useful. You can make a scrunchie out of almost any material, really. This scrap is about 50 centimeters long. The more fabric you have, or the shorter will just change the size of the scrunchie or how full it looks. And thicker fabrics are going to give a fuller shape, while thinner fabrics will be more drapey. But both can be nice, it just depends on what you like and what you have in your stash already. We're going to start off by cutting a length of elastic, just so we've got that ready. We're going to cut about 15 centimetres, then we can just put that to the side so we've got that ready. So this material is about 65 centimetres, and because it's a slightly thinner fabric, I'm going to keep the full length of it so I can get more scrunch to my scrunchie. So we want a strip of fabric that's about 10 centimetres in width, but again, this isn't too strict. It will just change the look of your scrunchie slightly, depending on how thick you want it. Fold it so your right sides are together. On each side, you just want to mark out about 5 centimetres. This is so we can close the loop when we're sewing later. So I've just got some indicator pins there, and then I'm just going to stop it slipping about, put some extra pins in the middle. And now we can go to our machine. So now we're at the machine, I'm going to sew with a straight stitch and a 1 centimetre seam allowance. So I'm just going to line up at 1 centimetre, and I'm going to start where I put my marker pins, so about 5 centimetres down. And as always, do a little back tack to make sure it stays in place. And then we're going to stop at this marker pin, so again about 5 centimetres up from the end. So now we have our scrunchie together, but inside out and open here, and not yet a circle. So we just need to bag it out. So the easiest way to do this is to take a safety pin, a fairly big one, and then just safety pin it to one side. And then you can use that to help you pull it through. If you just tuck the first bit inside to give you a start, and then you can feel for the safety pin and help you pull the rest through. So for a lot of projects now, you would press this flat, but with a scrunchie, you want to keep it quite dynamic, and you don't want it to be too rigid, so it's okay to just leave it like that. So you take your two flappy ends here, and then you'll see the reason now that we've left an opening at each end, because we want to attach these two along here. So this, if you don't leave a tail here, that can be quite tricky to do. You just pin it in place. And then we're ready to start sewing it. So with that turned in like that, you can see how we'll be able to close that up and have a finished circle. So now it's time to insert the elastic into the scrunchie. We're going to use our safety pin again, and just safety pin one side of it to help us pull it through. And I'm also just going to pin in place the elastic here so that it doesn't get lost when I'm trying to pull it through. So just tuck that inside and use the safety pin to feed it through again. So once you've got your two ends together, you can unpin it from the side of the fabric. Make sure you don't let go of it. Take your safety pin out and then pin these two together. This can get a little bit fiddly because now you're keeping a lot of fabric out the way. And then just pin that with a little bit of an overlap, say 1 centimetre or so. So now to sew our elastic together, we want to change our stitch to a zigzag to keep it more secure and allow the stitches to move a little bit with the elastic. And so then bring out as much as you can so that you can just fit only the overlap under the foot of the machine and not any of the scrunchy fabric because you don't want to get that caught. And I'm just going to lower my needle into the elastic before I take my pin out, sorry, just so that nothing snaps out of place. So do a few stitches forward and then go back over yourself. This doesn't need to be the prettiest stitch, but you just want to make sure that the elastic is going to stay secure. You can give it a tug to just double check that it's all going to stay in place. And then you can really see the scrunchie start to take shape. All we need to do now is close up this end here. So there's a couple of ways that you can do this. For this scrunchie portion, I'm going to show you on the machine. It's a little bit more obvious for the final product, but with the scrunchie being so tight together, it's not always that obvious and it is quicker. And then when we do the bow, I'll show you the alternative way. So you just want to match up your seams first and then pop a couple of pins in. You're just folding over the same seam allowance, so 1 centimetre again. And just make sure there's a pin in so you know where you need to start. So we're just going to stitch along here as close to the edge as possible whilst catching both sides of the fabric. And we're just going to want to do that on a straight stitch again, so make sure that you turn your machine back to a straight stitch. This is where it's important to have a thread colour that matches your fabric so that it's not too obvious in the finished scrunchie. So there we have our finished scrunchie. Just like that, but now we can add a bow. So I'm going to cut the same strip that I cut before. So for this strip, I'm just going to cut each end at an angle just to make the end of the bow look a little bit nicer and not as blunt as a rectangular. So you can just cut it like that, and then you can turn it over so you can do the same angle on the other side. So now we can pin this in place. You want right sides together again. This time we're going to pin the edges as well because we're going to sew them up closed. But we are going to leave a gap in around about the middle. So just work out where my middle is. About there. And we'll leave about 1 inch either side again just so we can turn it out easily. There you go, and just make sure you know which one your centre one is so mine's not pinned to both sides. And then we're ready to sew this up. So now we're going to sew up the edges of our bow. I've just changed the pin so it's really obvious which our centre one is, and then there's a pin either side to show us where to stop sewing. So we'll sew along this edge all the way to here, stop here, and then start again here and do the rest. So I'm on a straight stitch again and the same seam allowance as before, so 1 centimetre. To turn a corner, I stop about 1 centimetre away from this edge. Make sure that my needle's down using the hand turner at the side. Lift my foot up, and then I can move the material around so that it's in the right place to carry on. So I'm going to stop just by this pin here and make sure that you back tack at this point to keep it secure. And then I'm going to take it out, snip my threads. And then start again at my second needle. And back tack again to make sure that this side's secure as well. And repeat the same process for turning the corner here. So make sure your needle's down, your foot is up 1 centimetre from the edge, and then just turn the corner. So when you're finished, you should have something that looks like this with a hole in the middle. So now we're going to bag out our bow. So we're going to turn it inside out so that the pattern that we want is on the outside. So we're going to use a knitting needle for this, but you can just use anything long with a point on the end just to get the corners sharp. So you can just use the blunt end of the knitting needle so that you don't put a hole in the fabric. And then you can just push it through and bring it out like that. And then very carefully put the sharp end of the knitting needle in, and you can just use that one to get yourself to the point. And then just do the same for the other side. So then we're left with this, and we just need to close up that hole to finish it. I am going to press this time just to make the next step a little bit easier. But depending on your fabric, you might want to leave the rest of the bow unpressed, but I think I'm just going to give it a little press. So now we're ready to close up this last hole here. I'm going to show you a hand sewing technique to finish it this time. You could just do the same method as we did before on the machine, but this way it is a little bit more hidden. So I've got a hand sewing needle and I've got some matching thread, and we're just going to do a ladder stitch. So when you come to the end and you've pulled it tight, but not too tight so that it's going to wrinkle, you can just tie a knot again, just tucked a little bit inside. And then tie the tail. If you just put the needle inside and come out here, and then or anywhere in the fabric, and then if you just snip that, then the tail will disappear. And then you have your finished bow. So to attach it to the scrunchie, we're literally just going to tie it on. If you wanted it to be a little bit more secure, when you've put it through like this, so you have like a really slippy fabric or you're worried about it coming off, you could just put a couple of stitches in, but most of the time you're not going to need it. So I'm just going to place the bow where I've got my stitches from before, just to cover them up even more. And then just make sure this first knot is really tight. It even looks nice if you wanted like bunny ears, so if you did this initial bit a bit shorter, you could even just leave it like that. You can really play around with scrunchies. And there you go. You have a scrunchie with a bow on top.